Hello everyone, welcome to Keen Ear. So for this video we're going to be taking a look at some books. Now I'm not a huge book collector by any means. Generally once I've kept hold of a book for so long, I've read it and I've kind of looked at all the pictures, more than a few times. I'm kind of through with it really, and I kind of pass it on to somebody else or give it to charity and that kind of thing. And I guess I know in my heart of hearts really that I'm probably never going to read the same book more than once. So if for the sake of time, I suppose, there's so many books out there that I want to read. If I continually reread the same book, I'm just never going to get round to doing it. So yeah, I pass them on, and as a result, I don't really hoard books, which is something I'm kind of grateful for to a certain extent. It's one of the few things which I don't dedicate so much space and that kind of thing to hoarding away, unlike so many other things which are quite happily hoard away. But books isn't one of them. But anyway, the book I'm going to be showing first and foremost is a book I'm currently reading, about halfway through it, and it's called Conversations with McCartney. It's by Paul Du Noyer. And as you can tell by the title of this book, it's conversations with Paul through various different decades and periods in time. And it's Paul, of course, mostly focusing on his solo career, to a certain extent anyway. It's his musical career, but there's thankfully anyway, because I've heard the Beatles, particularly Paul, talk about Sergeant Pepper's and that kind of thing so much. He does talk, there is early on there is some things about the Beatles in it, but it doesn't thankfully focus too much on that. And he kind of, there's so much, just chapters after chapter of his solo career, and there's stuff about not getting along with John and John Lennon in the 1970s, and there's bits about George and all that kind of thing, and the films that they made, and it's so many different things. It's not just his albums and his just the music he's created. There's other things as well, but that's mostly the focus. Is and it's great insight to hear the mastermind himself talk about his work and talk about the more obscure things. And I think that's the kind of thing that I'm mostly interested in. That's the one thing that's impressed me the most really from reading this book, is it's the little things. It's what Paul McCartney's opinion of Red Rose Speedway or something like that. It's just stuff you just don't hear all that much. Or there's a chapter I'm reading now about his classical albums that he's made, and it's a great, really great insight from the man himself into these more obscure pieces of information. And one of the great things with Paul is he's a great conversationalist. He's a great interviewee, and and that really comes across in this book. He's very funny, he's very intelligent, of course, and he's got great stories. So yeah, this comes highly recommended. So give this a read if you can. If you're interested in Paul, it's a must read if you have even the slightest interest in the Beatles or Paul McCartney. Quite frankly, it's such a joy to read. It really is. So we'll move on to the next book, which is another highly recommended book that I finished reading about 3 months ago, and I've kept hold of it really to show it in a video. And I just wanted to recommend this book. Really, this was really the catalyst for this entire video. I just wanted, if anybody picks this book up as a result of this video, that'll be a win for me personally, because it's a book that I really enjoyed. It's called Sympathy for the Devil: The Birth of the Rolling Stones and the Death of Brian Jones. And it's by Paul Trynka, if I'm pronouncing that right. And this, as I've said, is a wonderful book. It really does try to tip the balance of significance, I guess, in more into Brian's favour, because there's definitely a feeling that it's kind of the surviving members of the Rolling Stones have kind of tipped it more to their own or to other people, more so than they have to. They effectively haven't given the credit where it's been due, effectively in certain examples. And before I was reading this book, I before I started, I had read books about the Rolling Stones. I'd read Keith Richards' autobiography, and you'd think I'd know more about the guy from that, more from Brian Jones from that experience of reading those books. I actually knew very little, quite honestly, and I think there is definitely some evidence that that he's not really given the attention or the credit by the surviving Rolling Stones as he really should be. I think there's definitely a claim to that. I think it is a legitimate claim, and how significant Brian was, particularly obviously early on. The start of the Rolling Stones. He arguably, without question, is the most significant member of the Rolling Stones. in those early days, there's no two ways about it. He was such an important guy back then. He formed the group, he handpicked each member of the Rolling Stones. So you can't get really more significant than that. And yeah, it's just a wonderful book that just adds so much more meat to the Rolling Stones story. It really does add. I think they really kind of do. To a certain extent, they really feel like the Stones are doing themselves a disfavor, right, by not acknowledging Brian as much, perhaps, as they should do, because I think there is some real, there really is some real intrigue, and there is some real quality, and there is really something of importance about Brian Jones that the Stones could maybe exploit more than they probably should. Maybe the egos are maybe holding that back to a certain degree, I suppose. I think there is some resentment definitely to this day of Brian. And one of the things that, there's so many things that I learned from this book, but one of the things I'll mention just for the sake of time, I can't talk about this book as much as I would like to, unfortunately. But one of the things I learned about this book through reading it was the time in which the Rolling Stones sort of, the Rolling Stones, besides Brian, of course, turned on him. They sort of went against him. I thought it was something that was, started in like 68, 69, that kind of thing, 67 maybe at the earliest, but actually happened, there's actually documents as early as 1964, and I believe when the Rolling Stones as a group found out that Brian was getting £5 extra in wages, that was the point really where they really began to hate the guy. And and you think 64, they only formed in 1962, so it was only 2 years into their existence, and the guy who started the whole group had basically gone from being the leader of the group, being the most important guy, to being hated within the group that he formed, so early on, and he had to live with that for years and years and years. And it's kind of, it goes into why he stuck around, the reason behind it. Anybody else would have left and that kind of thing. And it's a very interesting book. It goes as well towards the end into the conspiracy theories, but it's not a conspiracy theory book by any means. In fact, actually, the writer actually says that he doesn't believe that Brian was murdered, and that kind of thing. So yeah, it does touch upon it, but it doesn't go. It's not the focus of the book by any means. So I don't think it's that type of book. But yeah, this is highly recommended, and it's, if you've got any interest in the Rolling Stones, any interested in Brian Jones, this is something that really ticks all the boxes. And one of the things that when talking about the Stones sort of really hating Brian, and going against him, one of the things that kind of really stuck out and really sort of, the early days anyway of the Stones being, formed, as they were going around in a van and, to gigs, I guess, and they pull over to get something to eat or whatever. And if they all got back to the van before Brian, they'd just drive off and leave him. And it wasn't sort of like a jokey sort of thing to do where they'd come back 20 minutes later or whatever and pick him up. No, they would literally leave, and he'd have to make his own way to wherever it was they were going. I think you have to have a particularly, and this is early on, I guess it got kind of worse from there really. So yeah, there really was a large level of disfavor towards Brian. It's real eye opening to read. So yeah, wonderful book, well worth checking out. Move on to something else now from a completely different musical period, I guess, and this is Prince, Beautiful Ones. And this, yeah, one of the reasons I kept hold of this, I read this years ago actually. I've completely finished reading it, quite a while back. I kept hold of it because it's such a nice book, really. There's some really lovely pictures in it, and the cover's all shiny and everything. It's just such a lovely book. And what this is effectively, in part anyway, Prince's autobiography. And before, some months before Prince died, I believe, Prince was writing his autobiography. That was one of the projects he was working on, and of course he unfortunately never got to finish it. Because he never got to finish it, it's only really the start. It's basically just the start of his autobiography, and the rest of the book is kind of filled up with how the project came to be, really, how it started. So you've got a guy from the publishing company who's hanging out with Prince to kind of get some information from him, and exchange ideas and how they wanted to approach this project and that kind of thing, how it got off the road effectively. So yeah, the guy who was hanging around with him talks about his experiences of Prince and what they talked about and that kind of thing. That in itself is pretty interesting. Your Prince kind of just the lifestyle of Prince, because it's something that's very few people actually got an insight into Prince's life. His day-to-day life. He was a very secretive guy, and it was like you were kind of honoured to basically hang out with Prince. He wouldn't just hang around with anyone. So yeah, it's a great insight into that. And yeah, it's a real shame that of course it's an unfinished project. And Prince, when he died, it was a shock because he looked in such great shape. Nobody suspected that Prince was on his way out. We all suspected that Prince is going to be around for at least another 10 years, minimum. Really, I guess even he thought that to a certain extent. He looked like he was, in his 30s, his mid to late 30s at the very least. So yeah, real shock and real, and this is a great little pickup. If you're a Prince fan, and you probably have read this by now if you are a Prince fan. But yeah, this is something well worth checking out. The only thing I'd say though, because it's an unfinished project and that kind of thing, I would say that if you're not really that into Prince, if you're not something that you don't have a huge amount of interest in it, because it's not a finished project, you're probably not going to get a huge amount out of this, unfortunately, as a result. If it was a finished project, I probably would recommend it a bit more, but because of that, it's kind of it's not the an end product that it was as it was intended to be. Unfortunately, it's similar really to a lot of Prince's music. There's so much music that's in the vault that Prince never intended to be out there, and then there's a book as well, like an unfinished project, effectively, sort of like in a sort of in a state of being just sitting around in a vault, or being in the public domain. Out as a product. So yeah, it's sort of in a bit of no man's land, I suppose. So anyway, we'll move on to the next book I want to talk about, which I finished reading somewhat recently. It's a Squeeze book that James Griffiths wrote, here on YouTube. And yeah, I got through it, read it over the Christmas period, and yeah, really enjoyed it. It's surprisingly, because I'm not a huge Squeeze fan by any means. I literally only know a handful of their songs, and it's sort of testament to James's writing ability, I guess, that he was able to keep a non-fan, which I class myself as, entertained and want to keep on, because it'd have been very easy to sort of just talk about stuff which is just completely irrelevant to anyone besides the fans, and just lose that level of contact, I suppose, which doesn't happen. And I really enjoyed reading it. One of the things I liked about it was that it's something I don't really know too much about. It's similar to the Brian Jones book. As I was saying, I didn't really know a lot about Brian Jones, so I really did absorb all that information. I was very interested by it. So this is something very similar to that. Just because you don't know something, you don't know something particularly well, doesn't mean that you're not going to get carried along by the story and everything. I don't think the Squeeze story is a particularly amazing story personally. They didn't achieve anything hugely insignificant, and they didn't really do the opposite and really struggle either. They sort of did a bit of both. They did some amazing things, they had some great success, and they had some bumps along the road as well. But it's not like this story of great misery and disappointment, or this story of great success. It's somewhere in between. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of a roller coaster, I guess, to a certain extent. But yeah, it's a book that I very much enjoyed reading, and I think James did a fantastic job. It's a very readable book. It's something that it's enjoyable to just to read. The reading process is enjoyable, which is something that you've always got to try. And as a writer, you've always got to try and get that part right. That's so important. You've got to make the book readable. It's not just about writing a book. You've got to make it readable and entertaining to actually read. So congratulations, Jamie. James, I really enjoyed reading that. So we'll go on to some other things now, just to wrap this video up. I've got just a few more of the collectible books to a certain degree, to some extent anyway. Some of these are the more collectible books I have that I'm probably never going to pass on. I've got the Warlock of Love here. I've shown this a few times. Some of these I have actually shown in previous videos, but whether they're still up is anyone's guess, I suppose, at this point. But yeah, this is the Warlock of Love by Mark Bolan, and I bought this really when I was on a a deep sort of Mark Bolan sort of fascination, T-Rex fascination, some years ago now. And when I found out Bolan had, I was buying his albums and that kind of thing, and then I found out somewhere that it was on, just looking through YouTube, videos or websites and that kind of thing, and I found out, Bolan had he's got a book out, and I just couldn't believe it. And I found out how difficult it is to find. And it was just like a treasure hunt, I suppose, to try and find a copy. And this isn't particularly good, particularly good copy. It's pretty worn, and it's supposed to have a dust jacket, which is sadly missing from my copy. But it's a particularly rare book. It came out in '69, and it had like two pressings, two pressing runs, and that was kind of it, and that was kind of it. Really, it kind of went out of production and that sort of thing. So it's fairly rare. It's fairly hard to find, fairly hard to get your hands on. It's not something you're going to find easily or cheaply unless you're very, very lucky. And it was just I went through every bookshop and that kind of thing, in the area to try and find, and managed to find this on eBay at the end for a fairly decent price, but as you can see, it's not the world's best copy. And one of the things about books which I've learned, over the years is that, record collectors get accused of being finicky and that sort of thing. Well, it's nothing compared to book collectors. Book collectors are the most finicky people in the world, as far as I'm concerned. Unless a book's absolutely mint condition, it could be like 300 years old. Or if it's got like a page which is a bit creased, it's like it's no good, it's garbage. It's got to be as it came out the factory, and it's kind of crazy, really. But yeah, this is, as you can see, it's not the best condition, but it's a nice little read, nice little collectible, just little poems from Bolan. You can see that. Yeah, it's just a nice thing to have, really. It's a nice little. A little relic of the past that you just don't often see. I've very, going around record fairs, and I know that record fairs aren't really specialist in books, but they do have books, and you just don't see it. It's just something that's just too obscure, really, just too rare to pop up that often. And you get copies now and again on eBay and that kind of thing, and some of them are ridiculously priced. But if you bide your time, you can find a copy like I did, and it's worth it. It's a nice little Bolan pickup. It's not as ridiculously overpriced as some of his 45s are, which are just insane. But anyway, this is one of the last things I'm going to be showing. It's Linda McCartney retrospective souvenir book, I suppose. And this was an exhibition that was held in Liverpool Museum, and it's a selection of photographs by. It was an exhibition showing Linda's photographs, and of course there's loads of the Beatles and there's loads of Paul in there, loads of animals, and it's just a fantastic little book. If you can maybe find a copy of that somewhere, and if you like photography in general, Linda was a great photographer, so something that's well worth looking into. Keeping it with the Beatles, a few more books here to show. I'll kind of wrap the video up. It's this is one of John's, in his own right, one of his little silly little sort of storybooks that he wrote. I don't even know if you can class it as story, but it's just sort of just insane sort of scribblings more than anything else, really. And yeah, this is a nice little first edition. I managed to get my hands on some years ago, and it's a fairly nice condition, not the best. It's not up to highbrow book collectors condition sort of quality and that kind of thing, but it's good enough for me. Yeah, nice to have. Nice first. I think this is a first edition and a first print as well. So yeah, as early as you can get for this book. So it's nice. I've also got this one, Spaniard in the Works, and this, is more of the same, really. Little doodles and crazy little stories and things. And again, first edition, first press or whatever it's called. And I believe the page here, yeah, first published 1965. Yeah, just a nice little thing to have, nice little collectible. Some sort of questionable things about it, though. This book, Spaniard in the Works, in particular. I think if Paul was to release if John was supposed to, if he was to release this book now, he would get I think he'd get hot water about some of the things that he said. That back in the '60s, I guess, was more acceptable. But yeah, if you read the book, you'll find out what I'm kind of getting at. You know what he says about Spaniards in particular. The title of the actual book, Spaniard in the Works. So anyway, this is a little Beatles magazine thing now I've got picked up some years ago at a some sort of Beatles fair. I don't know what language this is in, unfortunately, but I think it's Danish or Norwegian or something like that. But there's this came out around the early days of the Beatles, of course, 63, 64, something like that, and it's they effectively made an English version, they made the German version, they made a Spanish version, an Italian version, whatever version this is, and they just distributed them around Europe and that kind of thing. And it's by the same company, it's just different languages and that kind of thing. So yeah, if you look, I imagine there's probably Beatles fans out there that have like an Italian one and a Greek one and a Norwegian one and a God knows what else one, and that sort of thing. So yeah, move on to this. This is The Beatles Are Back, an American magazine. It's just basically a publicity magazine for the Beatles. A pretty early one. It says 50 cents on it. I think it's from 64. I'd imagine it was 64, maybe very early 65 perhaps. But yeah, it's not in the best condition, but it's considering its age and it's just a magazine, it's pretty good. I picked this up at a Beatles, not particularly great photo of Paul there, but yeah, I picked this up at a Beatles sort of collector's thing years ago. Yeah, it's a better photo of Paul. Some difference between, if you have a look, if we can get that will be Paul's look. This is what time does to people. But Paul's quite a he's aged pretty well. He's aged like a fine wine, actually, Paul. But anyway, that's that magazine. I've also got this. I'll just quickly go through this. This is the Beatles De Agostini vinyl collection, and it comes with some magazines. And I've been collecting there's one of Bob Dylan, and that just comes. You get the record, and it just comes with like a poster thing, a single sheet of paper. These actually come with like little actual magazines or booklets. And a lot of people were critical of these when they came out, because it's just like so little to them. And then the Bob Dylan ones come out, and it's like, bloody hell, the Beatles ones by comparison are so much better. So anyway, you've got the one about Sgt. Pepper, you've got one of the White Album, got one of Help and Abbey Road, and I got some other bits and pieces like posters and stuff. Yeah, nice photographs inside. It's just a nice little thing to keep hold of. You get them, you flick through them, you put them away, and you sort of never look at them again. I think that's the way this is worked out. So yeah, this is like the poster. That's what the poster looks like, only a lot bigger. When it's folded out. It's all the albums that they had. So yeah, that's it. That's all I'm going to be sharing. I didn't know this video was going to be over 20 minutes long, but that's the way it works out sometimes. You're just going to have to deal with it, unfortunately. So yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. And let me know of any books that you have in your collection, anything you recommend that I really should check out. If it's Mark Bolan related, if it's Bowie related, anything that's I'm always on the lookout for new books and that sort of thing. And hopefully I've recommended enough books for you to check. I'd particularly recommend Conversations with McCartney and the Brian Jones book. Highly recommend them if you have any interest in that sort of field whatsoever and you haven't read them. Check them out as soon as you can. They're pretty easy to get hold of and inexpensive and that sort of thing. So yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Bye bye.